Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. It's your favorite history teacher, back at you again with another historical video. Today, we're going to be talking more about the Depression, although this is the last lesson in the chapter, the module, whatever you want to call it. So let's end this. Yeah? All right. Where is it? There it is. Okay. So, talking about Hoover's failed policies. Remember, President Herbert Hoover was elected right before the stock market crash in 1929. So, talking about the president. That was your warm up. All right, objectives. We're going to critique the reasons why Hoover was so reluctant to help people during the Great Depression, analyze the actions Hoover took to remedy the effects of the Great Depression, and describe what occurred to the bonus army. All right, do nothing. After the stock market crash, Herbert Hoover tried to reassure Americans that the nation's economy was on a sound footing. In his view, the more important thing for Americans was to remain optimistic and go about their business as usual. Most Americans believed that depressions were a normal part of the business cycle. According to this theory, periods of rapid economic growth were naturally followed by periods of depression. So, the best course in a slump was to do nothing and let the economy fix itself, according to those experts. Hoover will take a slightly different position. He felt that the government could, keyword, could play a limited role in helping to solve problems. So Americans were just used to it. They were told about it and they just believed what they were told. All right, rugged individualism. So Hoover was an engineer, humanitarian, and he put a great faith in the power of reason. Like many Americans at the time, Hoover believed that one of the government's chief function was to foster cooperation between competing groups and interests in society. If business and labor, workers and business owners were in a conflict, for example, the government should step in and help them find a solution that serves their mutual interests. This cooperation must be voluntary rather than forced. Hoover felt that the government's role was to encourage and facilitate cooperation, not to control it. On the other hand, Americans also valued this rugged individualism that Hoover praised during his campaign in 1928. What it is, test question, the idea that people should succeed through their own efforts. Now, it's kind of a stem from like the American dream, but it doesn't really fit in this aspect because according to this definition, people should be able to take care of themselves and their families rather than depend on the government to bail them out. Well, sometimes things just get so bad that the government has to step in. So, according to this, Hoover will oppose any form of federal welfare or the direct relief to the needy. Your people are starving, President Hoover. He believed that handouts would weaken people's self respect and local organizations should pitch in to help care for the less fortunate. So, not only should your government, who is sworn to protect you, defend you, he is worried about your self respect and the self respect of others. Oh, you're so careful. You're so caring. Ugh. The federal government, he said, should direct relief measures, but not through a vast federal bureaucracy. That bureaucracy would be too expensive and stifle individual liberties. Hoover, however, when the Depression took hold, the moral fiber wasn't what the people were worried about. No one cared. Fix the economy, bro. Hoover's response shocked and frustrated the suffering Americans. So that's Hoover getting elected. Me and my woes. All right. So Hoover's political philosophy caused him to take a cautious approach to the Depression. Soon after the crash, he called together key business, banking, and labor leaders. He urged them to work together to find solutions to the nation's economic woes and to act in ways that would not make a bad situation worse. For example, he will ask employers not to cut wages or lay off workers. He will ask labor leaders not to demand higher wages or go on strikes. And it's like, no one's buying stuff in the economy, so I can't pay my workers. People aren't buying stuff from my business, so I can't pay my workers. You know, I gotta cut wages or I gotta lay off people. He also will create a special organization to help private charities generate contributions for the poor. But none of these steps made much of a difference. A year after the crash, the economy was still shrinking and unemployment was still rising. More companies went out of business and soup kitchens became a common sight, and general misery continued to grow. Shanty towns and hobos continued to roam. Remember, what's a shanty town? Or what was the nickname for a shanty town during this time? Think about it. So here's Herbert Hoover, political cartoon, 1929 resolution. I'm not a bit curious, but I'd like to peep into that book. The elephant represents the Republican Party. He is a Republican. All right. Frozen 2 plot. So one of the projects that Hoover approved did make a difference. Years earlier, when Hoover served as Secretary of Commerce, one of his earliest proposed initiatives was the construction of a dam on the Colorado River. Aiming to minimize federal interventions, Hoover proposed to finance the dam's construction by using profits from the sales of the electric power the dam would generate. That dam needs to be without an end. He also helped arrange an agreement of water rights among the 7 states on the Colorado River Basin: Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. By the time the massive project won congressional approval in 1928 as part of the $700 million public works program, Hoover had been elected to the White House. In the fall of 29, nearly 1 year into his presidency, Herbert Hoover was finally able to authorize the construction of the Boulder Dam, later nicknamed the Hoover Dam. In addition to providing electricity and flood control, the dam also provided a regular water supply, which enabled the growth of California's massive agriculture economy. Test question. Today, the dam helps provide water for cities such as Los Angeles and Las Vegas. So, here it is. Or here it is. And if you watch The Office, corporate needs to find the differences between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture. That's from the movie Frozen, FYI. Looks the same. That's what it looks like today. It almost looks like something out of Star Wars, to be honest with you. All right, farmers get wild. As the country's economic difficulties increased, the political tide turned against Hoover and the Republicans. In the 1930 congressional elections, Democrats took advantage of the anti-Hoover sentiments to win more seats in Congress. As a result of that election, Republicans lost control in the House and saw the majority in the Senate dwindle to 1. As Americans grew more and more frustrated by the Depression, they expressed their anger in a number of ways. Farmers, stung by these low crop prices, burned their corn and wheat and dumped their milk on highways rather than sell it at a loss. Some farmers even declared a farm holiday and refused to work their fields. A number blocked roads to prevent food from getting to market in hopes that food shortages would raise prices. Some farmers used force to prevent authorities from foreclosing on their farms. Americans expressed their dissatisfaction with Herbert Hoover and his policies by attaching his name to various symbols of the Depression. So we already know about Hoovervilles. Okay. Newspapers were called Hoover blankets because, the poor had to sleep out in the cold and newspapers were all they had. And empty pockets turned inside out were called Hoover flags. Those who called him a great humanitarian now saw him as a cold and heartless man. Heartless? Despite public criticisms, Herbert Hoover continued to hold firm on his principles. He refused to support direct relief or any other forms of federal welfare. Many Americans were going hungry and they blamed Hoover for their plight. And criticism of the president and his policies will continue to grow. Man, I do not want to be this guy. So, Hoover blankets. And then Hoover flags, pockets turned inside out. All right, it's the thought that counts. This is a test question. As time went on and the Great Depression deepened, President Hoover gradually softened his position on government intervention and took a more activist approach to the nation's economic troubles. In Hoover's view, the Boulder Dam was a model of how the federal government could encourage cooperation. His attempts to relieve the Great Depression, GD, involved negotiating agreements among private entities, again reflecting his belief in small government, not big government, small government. For example, he backed the creation of the Federal Farm Board, an organization of farm cooperatives. The Farm Board was intended to raise crop prices by helping members buy crops and keep them off the market until market prices rose. Herbert Hoover also tried to prop up the banking systems by persuading the nation's largest banks to establish the National Credit Corporation. This organization will loan money to smaller banks to help them avoid bankruptcy. So even banks are declaring bankruptcy. That's when you know it's bad. So here's a political cartoon. Farm relief. You got a guy with a gun shooting the scarecrows. And if you can't tell, this is like a barren wasteland. It may not be perfect, but I'm sure it'll help quite a bit. And that's Herbert Hoover telling a farmer. 31. Can you do something for me? By late 1931, many people could see that these measures had failed to turn the economy around. With the presidential election looming, Hoover appealed to Congress to pass a series of measures to reform banking, provide mortgage relief, and funnel more federal money into the business investments. He will sign into law the Federal Home Loan Bank Act, which lowered mortgage rates for homeowners and allowed farmers to refinance their farm loans and avoid foreclosure. It wasn't until Herbert Hoover's time in office was over that Congress passed the Glass-Steagall Banking Act, which separated investment from commercial banking and would, Congress hoped, prevent another crash. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation, RFC, was Herbert Hoover's most ambitious economic measure, however, and it was approved by January 1932. It authorized up to $2 billion in emergency financing for banks, life insurance companies, railroads, and other large businesses. Herbert Hoover believed that the money would, quote, trickle down to average citizens through job growth and higher wages. However, many critics questioned this approach as they argued that the program would benefit only corporations and the poor still needed that direct relief. Hungry people could not wait for these benefits to, quote, trickle down to their tables. In the first 5 months of its operation, the RFC loaned more than $805 million to large corporations, but business failures were still happening. The RFC was an unprecedented example of federal government involvement in a peacetime economy, but it was too little, too late. Like, you can't just wake up automatically one day and be like, I want to fix it because I want to get elected again. That's the Federal Home Loan Bank Board. It's the RFC. All right, let's talk about the bonus army. This is a test question. These next two slides are test questions. So in 1932, an incident further damaged Herbert Hoover's image and public morale. That spring, between 10 and 20,000 World War I veterans and their families arrived in D.C. from all over the country. They called themselves the Bonus Expeditionary Force, or the Bonus Army. World War I, they're called the American Expeditionary Force, so, there's a play on that. Led by Walter Walters, great name, an unemployed cannery worker from Oregon, the Bonus Army came to the nation's capital to support a bill under debate in Congress. It's called the Patman Bill, authorized the government to pay a bonus to World War I veterans who had not been compensated adequately for their wartime service. This bonus, which Congress approved in 1924, was supposed to be paid out in 1945 in the form of cash and a life insurance policy. Congressman Wright Patman, sounds like it should be Patman Wright, whatever, believed the money, an average of $500 a soldier, should be paid immediately. Hoover thought that the bonus marchers were, quote, communists and persons with criminal records rather than these veterans, so-called veterans of World War I. So he opposed this legislation but respected the marchers' right to peaceful assembly. He even provided them food and supplies so that they could erect a shanty town within sights of the Capitol. On June 17th, the Senate voted down the Patman Bill, and Hoover then called the bonus marchers to leave. Most did, but approximately 2,000, still hoping to meet with the president, refused to go. So here are those bonus marchers. Yeah, they totally look like communists. All right. The end of Herbert Hoover. And the end of Module 9. Nervous about the angry group to become violent, Herbert Hoover decided that the Bonus Army should be disbanded. July 28th, a force of 1,000 soldiers under the command of General Douglas MacArthur and his aide, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, those names will come up next in a couple weeks, came to roust the veterans. In the course of this operation, the infantry gassed more than 1,000 people, including an 11-month-old baby that died, and an 8-year-old boy who was partially blinded. 2 people were shot, and many more were injured. Most Americans were stunned and outraged when they heard about this treatment of veterans. Once again, President Hoover's image suffered, and now that the election was nearing, in November, Herbert Hoover would face a formidable opponent, Democratic candidate and popular New York governor, General Franklin Delano Roosevelt. When FDR heard of the attack on the Bonus Army, he said to his friend Felix Frankfurter, "Well, Felix, this will elect me." The downturn in the economy and Hoover's inability to deal effectively with the Depression had sealed his political fate. So, what a loser. That's Herbert Humphrey Hoover. All right. Okay. So I know a little quicker, a little more stuff, okay, because we know the social aspect, we know the economical aspect, but we don't really hear much more. That's why I had you write a little bit more of like why he failed. And hopefully you were able to figure out some of those aspects for why Herbert Hoover failed to end the Depression or help alleviate the pressure of the Great Depression. All right, that's going to do it for now. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. Your homework is page 435, questions 3 and 4. 435, questions 3 and 4. All right, if you guys did enjoy that, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.